Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I was off for a couple weeks, but I'm really happy to be back again with a longtime friend, Eric Johnsen, formerly of Google. That's when we first got introduced back in the day when I was doing some work on Google Tango for Wayfair, just coming out of my hackathon. So I'm really excited to connect with Eric today, and I'm going to pass it to him to give a little bit more background of what he's been up to recently.
Hey Mike, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I just was thinking the year it was almost 10 years ago, I think, when you and I met
That's
when
right.
you were doing Tango work with Wayfair. You were one of the first big partners for us. That was great. And it's been great to keep in touch over the years. So a little bit of background on me. I've been in the XR space, on one hand for a while, but on the other hand, a lot less than many other people. But I've been doing it about 10 years. Actually, no, about 15. Since the first foray into the space was with Glass. I was on the enterprise team at Google, and the Glass team pulled me in to, at that time, bar the door from enterprise customers that wanted to come in and use Glass because Glass was focused on consumer. And we ended up building a whole enterprise strategy. At that time, it was called Glass at Work. It was the last part of Glass that hung on until they finally shut the whole thing down. And then since then, working with other big companies and small companies in the AR space, Amazon, smaller companies like 60.ai. In the last 4 years, I've been doing what I call fractional business development. So I split my time between mainly early stage companies like pre-series B that need directional go-to-market help and kind of help them avoid big mistakes that you might make if you wait too long to hire to get in touch with the market and get market feedback.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Eric. And it is interesting to think, how far back this goes. I remember seeing the first early videos of like Glass and Tango and some of this kind of AR mapping. I'm out in the world, I'm, navigating somewhere and we're seeing all this heads up stuff. It's interesting how, in some regards, we've made a lot of progress, but in a lot of regards, we're still kind of in the same spot. We're still seeing those same kind of promotional marketing experiences. And even just this week, there was a TED talk that Google had given to demonstrate, some glasses they're working on that, look very similar to that initial concept and promise. Except it feels like it's really here now, and maybe the AI infusion is something that's a new twist on it. But otherwise, to me, it feels like we've been in this world for a while. And how do you feel about the progress we've made? Are we getting somewhere?
Yeah, yeah, it's we always joke about the various conferences, right? Because it's like, oh, this is the year, and here we are, you and I, 10 years later. Um, I think we've made some progress. So probably the biggest thing, and it's the thing that's in all of our faces right now, is AI, progress with AI, and that video, that TED Talk with Sharon that you mentioned, um, is a great example because he pulls in Gemini use cases and shows how Gemini and glasses will work together. And so I think there's some really great use cases there. The uh, the big challenges of weight, and I think also fashion, which is related to weight.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think there's been really good progress on that front. Like you look at Meta's latest glasses, and they're down 80 or 90 grams, which is still pretty heavy, like relative to something like this that I'm wearing. But the ones that Sharam showed on stage, they must have been a lot less than that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, they really look pretty similar to what you're wearing now, right? And I think we're starting to get to this point where that convergence of there are smart glasses out there, and even Google Glass is an example that are really lightweight because they don't have a lot of functionality, right? They've got maybe a camera or a speaker, and they're doing some processing, but they're not showing anything on the screen. I think that's where you start to get a little more bulk added to these is when you're trying to power displays, especially ones that would be, augmented reality as I think we traditionally think of it, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you get, the big VR pass through devices like Meta Quest 3 or, Vision Pro, where those things are kind of big, bulky helmets that, from a fashionable and wearable and, daily use sense, those are really far away. Whereas it seems like the capabilities that are in those devices are getting miniaturized, and then if we could get that into the form factor, that's been kind of the dream, right? I think we were looking for
right.
this like merging, and it seems like it's on the horizon to me in the next couple years.
Yeah. Well, I have to believe that the Apples, the Metas, the Googles, as they work on VR headsets, because I think we all know like the big target here is the XR, the AR glasses that you can wear all day. And so then the question is, well, why even spend time on the more immersive headsets? And I have to think it's because there's a lot of overlapping tech. It helps develop use cases. It helps develop and push forward the technology and get people excited with immersive experiences.
Yeah.
But the bullseye are the XR headsets. And I gotta give Meta credit, and Zuck credit for continuing to invest in this area. And I think one area that goes, I mentioned a bit earlier, that's so critical, but it's so hard for Silicon Valley to get its head around is fashion. You know
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
a lot of people in Silicon Valley think, oh well, I can deal with something that doesn't look great or is kind of heavy, because think of all the cool things that it does. But the vast majority of people, they're really worried about what they put on their face. I mean, you look at people in an optometrist store shop, or a Warby Parker store, and they'll try on glasses for an hour to find the right pair.
Mhm.
This is your brand to the world. And so Zuckerberg with the Ray-Ban stories, teaming up with a fashion brand, and then putting out glasses that didn't have displays because they would be too heavy if they did, was super smart. And I think they've sold over 1 million of those Ray-Ban stories.
Yeah, it seems
So
like they've had some success with that, and then tying the AI into it too gives it a little more immediate value or benefit because it's the camera's like pulling in data from the world, so that's like the vision really more for the AI than for you as a user. And eventually, you get used to that conversational piece, and if there's a visual element that gets added to a future iteration of these, then I think people will be excited about it. But maybe they do need to come in all shapes and sizes, right? Like glasses do today. Like we got a couple different
true.
companies working on a couple different brands, but they're typically going to have like one SKU and one style, maybe a few different colorways, but not necessarily a full range of different shapes and sizes. Somewhat due to the technical limitations, and probably also just due to keeping that product like market like focused on let's design one and design it really well. But I think
Right.
once we hit success, we're gonna see a lot more, diversity in types of these headsets. At least I would hope.
Yeah, totally agree. So designing one and doing it super well leads me to another element that I think has evolved, is focusing in on specific use cases and specific types of end users. So, one of the things that's kept us kind of in this death spiral, I think, in the XR space is that, everybody wants to build the platform. Like, well, what's the killer app? Well, it can be
Mhm,
anything, whatever developers build on it. But the problem with that approach is, historically you end up having to build so many sensors and so many different technologies into the glasses to enable developers to build, any use case, that they become too big to wear. And so what I have seen is I've seen the companies start to really zero in and focus on specific types of use cases that then allow a more focused set of sensors and a lighter pair of glasses. So like you see Meta starting to talk about travel a lot, which
mhm,
is really
yeah,
smart. You see other companies, especially those that are super lightweight, like under 30 grams, that either don't have a display or don't have a camera, um, focusing on sports, for example, which I think is
mhm,
really smart also.
yeah, or like a
Because,
big screen, right? It's like I can watch the screen. I don't have full tracking, but I can turn my head, and it's good enough to get a bigger TV than the cost of the glasses would buy you.
right, or I don't even have a display. I just use a camera to do visual search, like what Sesame is doing. Brendan Uribe, who left Meta and started Sesame.ai. Um, so that's really interesting when you start to get eye tracking and cameras and you start looking at visual search, which was something also that Sharam demoed
Mhm,
with in that TED talk. But the eye tracking, I think, has been underestimated. Visual search without eye tracking is kind of worthless, right? Because like you look at my environment here, I have a desk, a coffee mug, a phone, a screen, a picture frame, a map. What is it that I'm asking about?
mhm.
And so that'll be and combine that with AI, the visual search with AI. It's kind of a no-brainer use case and super useful in something like travel. So I think
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
totally.
that
Or like the
that focus,
translation that they were showing off too, being able to
yes,
like look at something and in a big crowded area have that just that one particular element highlighted and translated.
for sure. Visual search, translation, navigation, those are all great use cases and all super applicable and valuable while traveling. And guess what? Travelers spend a lot of money too. So and they're often outdoors. They need sunglasses. I think it's that travel use case is a really interesting one.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, as we're discussing some of these capabilities, though, one area that I think is important to discuss is kind of the privacy aspect, right? So, like, you're out
Mm,
in the world, you're recording things. Google got a lot of backlash, 10 years ago on this front, but I think the maybe consider privacy considerations have probably changed over time. And I think
hmm.
people, that are not the user who are encountering other people with glasses are, less likely to, put up a fight or a protest. At least that's kind of like what I'm seeing. It's there's obviously going to be different exceptions, and I wonder what you know that's going to impact how the technology works, right? If you're in a public space, do you put a little light on if you're recording, or like what's that kind of privacy expectation for the users that are not the users, like the people in the background, right? You could see how this could go, dark really quickly, where the state's like looking for facial recognition, and you walk by someone in the crowd, and now the police are chasing you, right? So like,
Right.
there's some potential concern that's not necessarily paranoia out there.
Yeah, it's super interesting, right? Especially with AI, because like you look at something like back to the Ray-Ban stories, and why Meta is putting AI into the glasses and camera and using and starting with cameras only. Is it because they want to sell more glasses, or is it because is the primary driver because they want to collect video from the human perspective and use that to
Mhm.
train ML? And so, the fear around AI and machine learning, is that going to come into play with people wearing glasses, and are people going to worry about that, or is it going to be more of the traditional, hey, are you taking pictures of me, and privacy from that perspective? And you have so when you look at something like Snap, right, more of the Gen Z users, um, they have a whole different perspective on cameras. Their cameras are out all the time, and they're
Yeah,
publishing much more of their personal lives than Gen X or millennials. And so the reactions and the sensitivity to privacy have gone down. But I think it kind of approaches a limit, right? Where if you get too close to the limit, then it can flare, and then it becomes like suddenly with glass, for example, the whole glass hole thing. Um, it kind of got we got too close to the fire, and then it
yeah,
flared, and it was kind of over. Like there's no going back. And so I think you've seen Snap and Meta learn from that and kind of push limits, but also be very careful in guiding users how to make sure to educate people around them when they're taking photos and putting the light on there. I like the idea of actual mechanically being able to close the camera so that other people can see that you just can't.
yeah.
It's not
That's a good
physically
idea. It's kind of like
possible
those
to take
webcam
photos.
covers, right? A little privacy cover.
Right.
It's like you're not getting hacked because it's physically blocked, right? So I think there's maybe something to be said for that too, as that visual cue to others.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting. It'll be really interesting to see how that goes.
Nice. From a software perspective, are there any particular applications that you're excited about or would look forward to being able to do, that you can't currently do with your phone today, or that would be just a lot more convenient without holding another, device in your hand?
Oh, well, we talked about a few that I'm really excited about and I might be biased by like my personal life. So I cycle a lot,
Hmm.
and so being able to wear glasses and to track some of the data and to be able to take pictures and video while I ride is one that I get really excited about. And I see how much cyclists spend on all their gear, including me.
Yep.
Um, and so the question is, so there are some of those out there now, and the question is, why aren't you using those? Like, well, Eric, why don't you wear Meta Ray-Ban stories to take videos and pictures? And I've done that. Or why don't you wear some of the other glasses that don't have cameras but have displays that track your heart rate data and your power and your speed. Um, they just aren't. They cannot replace the current glasses. So I wear these Oakley Sutra lights when I ride, and they're just there's the color and the lenses and the comfort is so good. And so it goes back to that fashion and comfort.
Mhm.
They've got to match that. In order to do that, you have to zero in on sports and specifically cycling. And so again, it's that zeroing in on the use case. So anyway, I get excited about sports, both participating and watching sports. So the same old, to your point, same old use case around. Well, I want to sit courtside, right, at an NBA game, or
Mhm. Yeah.
I want to sit at a basketball game. So sitting courtside virtually, or I want to go to a baseball game and be able to have stats overlay the players on the field. I think those are really interesting, kind of more of a niche use case. The travel use case is really interesting. There's the business use case of, speaking of privacy, of going to a conference and doing facial recognition for the people that I'm looking for, or maybe the people that have budgets or that are leaders in their companies, walking around CES and automatically getting alerts when
Yeah,
I see
pulling
those
up someone's
people.
LinkedIn, for example, and just kind of getting a quick like this person I should connect with, and probably some AI recommendation of, hey, this is the type of person that would be a good connection for you for whatever reason that AI decided.
For sure. And that one's, it's not new, right? People talk about that. Every time we go to a conference, we talk about that use case, and it's possible, 100% possible today.
Hmm.
So the question is, why aren't people doing that? And it goes back to the question you asked about privacy and social acceptance. And so that's one where I think there's a big opportunity for early stage companies, because that one's a really difficult one for big companies to start with, because they're going to worry. Their lawyers are going to advise them, no, don't do facial recognition. I've been inside the companies in those conversations. Don't do facial recognition. It's too much of a third rail. And so an early stage company, that gives a big opportunity for an early stage company to do it, whether they build their own glasses or they wait for the right pair of glasses to come out that have a software platform development kit where they can build
Hmm.
that use case. But I wouldn't be surprised if this year at CES, or maybe even AWE in June in Long Beach, if we have some people showing off that kind of use case.
Nice. Yeah, speaking of development, I noticed that Snap has a developer program that it's interesting. It's unique. Like typically, you buy the hardware and then you work for free with a software license. It seemed like for this one, you sign up and you pay $100 a month with like a 12-month commitment, and then they give you the hardware. I don't think you actually own the hardware, but you have access to like basically the early developer kit. I thought that was kind of an interesting model, and maybe even something I might consider doing myself. I a little bit scattered. So I've got a lot of projects that I'm always kind of thinking about and excited about. And one of the use cases that you mentioned, the cycling one, for me as a runner, I was thinking similar thing,
Mm,
with running stats, right? Like have the
mm,
smartwatch and often kind of looking down and checking things. But I was thinking it'd be great to be able to see a ghost of myself, like in Mario Kart
hmm.
when you race yourself as a ghost. Like would be cool to be able to see like, hey, on my best day or on this particular stretch of the course, like how did my performance compare? And can I see, a representation of like where I was last time, either in front or behind as like a additional motivating factor. So I think, yeah, there's definitely some cool use cases that startups need to kind of go out and start making. And hopefully these types of developer kits are hitting the streets right now at the right time, where when the hardware is ready in a year or two, there will be some applications already ready. I felt like that was a big miss with the Vision Pro. Apple likes to keep
Mm.
things kind of close to the chest, but to my dismay, they didn't really have a lot of their first party apps taking advantage of the spatial nature of the device. Like I called out like their music, like they have a home pod. They could have made some spatial, like, virtual speaker system. And instead they just had a little floating iPad, Apple Music. So I'd love to see, more developers kind of jumping on this now so that when these consumer devices are out there, there's some compelling new interesting use cases.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's Apple's MO, right? Is the first few versions will have mostly first party content, maybe a few second party where they do heavy development with big brands,
Hmm.
like they were touting their partnership with Disney. I know when they released the last version. New rumors coming out about a lighter weight tethered version.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, I
that'll be
saw that, and
interesting.
I wonder if it's gonna be a compromise in some of the device capability in order to hit that lighter weight form factor, or maybe it's just the natural evolution of the tech and it'll still be just as expensive, and they're not trying to necessarily bring in a bigger audience, but they're just trying to get smaller. It'll be interesting to see what that strategy looks like.
Yeah, I mean, certainly they'll push compute off, right? That'll be part of the tethering because they already had the battery tethered. So,
Yeah,
so the only other big reason would be compute. So it'll be interesting. But with regards to Snap, yeah, so Snap's been pretty smart with pricing and managing supply. So I think they were watching glass carefully. One of the things that we screwed up was, you know, so pricing. We kind of managed it the traditional supply and demand, economics 101 route of, well, we've got a lot of demand, so let's increase the price. And then the wrong people bought it and became a rich person's toy, and
mhm,
that
yeah.
that was part of what backfired on us. And Snap managed it a different way. Is I don't know if you remember, but they used to have the vending machine that they moved
That's right, it wasn't
around.
like a truck or something and would show up in different areas, and or maybe I'm
Right.
thinking of something different, but I thought
No,
they
it
had
was.
something
Yeah.
like that where you just show
And
up and get them.
yeah, and they made it fun, and so they managed supply and demand that way, but they kept the price down. And then so it's interesting they're experimenting in a similar way with price in their developer ecosystem. And I can imagine that part of the reason they want to charge money is just to qualify a little bit to make sure, A, to trim down the number of people they have to support, as they also offer support services with that $100 a month,
Uh-huh.
and B, just make sure there's some skin in the game, right? So a little bit of money, not a ton of money. Um, yeah, and then I think the question will just be what kind of service and how much access do they provide to the glasses. The challenge they have is there isn't a lot of critical mass of, or even like a ramp, a clear ramp to a lot of people using the glasses. So
Yeah,
that's
that's been a challenge
that's
for a lot of these, XR technologies, let's say for developers. Even on the Meta Quest, like there's an ecosystem in the game space, but getting beyond like, traditional gaming, it's pretty hard. There's not really a lot of discovery. Even speak for myself, I made a game that's, kind of a game, kind of an application where you can like paint stuff, but I didn't find that there was enough like demand or at least awareness of the product without investing a lot into kind of like marketing or having like a publisher and that whole route. So that feels like another opportunity for developers or for these companies to court developers to make it easier for them to get their product like discovered by folks. And I know there's like a shift on Meta's side as well towards more like free to play experiences. And I
mm,
read a stat recently that said like 70% of user engagement is spent on things that are free. And so that's a challenge if you're a developer, right? Because like the long-term monetization, if you're giving away your product, is, well, there's going to be a huge user base. But if that user base already isn't that big, and there's no good way to monetize currently, it just makes it hard to take the time and the effort to commit to building something that is, built enough, right, to make it worthwhile to the customer. But yet, you need to fund your company, especially if you're working more than just solo, like I was. You need to be able to pay people, and at the end of the day, if you can't sell your product, it's hard to have a repeatable business model there.
right. And then some companies end up going down the enterprise or military routes as a result. And if you do go the consumer route, it ends up being something lightweight that'll drive advertising, which is
Mhm.
a whole nother topic kind of related to the societal adoption as well. And privacy is getting into advertising as a model to support software development, which I think you would probably agree it's inevitable. And that's something I think we all need to do our part to manage that and make sure it doesn't become, A, it doesn't kill the platform, and B, we deal with the privacy aspects. But it's going to be a struggle for sure. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Well, all right. As we're getting kind of close to the end of the time segment, I also wanted to just pivot a little bit, talk a little bit about, kind of some of the fractional work that you're doing and how that kind of relates to, opportunities for folks to reach out to you to potentially learn more about the space, get some additional help. So let me just pass it to you to just pitch
Oh,
that.
thanks. Yeah. So there've been fractional finance people like fractional CFOs, fractional HR for a while. And by the way, what I mean with fractional is really just as simple as part time. So splitting time across multiple companies, selling fractions of time, and um, and then of course we've had the gig economy, like I mentioned earlier, with Uber drivers or TaskRabbit or errands. I think increasingly we're going to see that same mode of work across many different functions, and the reason is really simple, is because especially with things like COVID, where people are working remote and people want, have kind of gotten used to different lifestyles of work. um, the economics will drive it. So both the client can get a lot more value, and the person selling the fractional services can get a lot more value out of it.
Hmm.
If you compare it to development, for example, we've been doing things like agile development for decades, right? Versus waterfall. So why are we still doing waterfall employment? Why are we still doing one or zero as far as hiring people and human resources? There are a lot of myths as to why people think, well, I don't think a half-time or a quarter-time business development person would work for us. But that's really all they are, is just myths, right? Like things
Hmm.
like, well, what about IP? What if they work for my competitor? That can be solved with contracts. From the employee side or the worker side, what about benefits? This is what Obamacare was, right? This is in California, it's called Covered California, and you just go out and you buy your insurance. So I know for me in business development, the work comes, it ebbs and flows. And so, when I was sitting inside of big companies, my peers and I would often try to find ways to look busy when times were slow and there wasn't, we're waiting on development of the product or whatever it is. But
Right.
why do that? Like, why even pay for a business development person when you're not needing them? And so that's the idea, is pay for the work when you need it, and when um, you don't pay for it. So compare it to cloud computing, for example. Big companies or even small companies will pay, some fixed amount for a fixed availability of cloud computing, where they have services or compute that needs to run constantly. But then they'll have spikes and variable use of cloud computing as well, and that's one of the huge benefits of it. So it's kind of a similar idea. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I like it. And it's like you already, yeah, for like a fractional role, you still have someone that's basically 100% like thinking about you, right? So if there's a conversation where there's an opportunity to make a connection or to enhance your business, you're not going to say like, oh, well, this isn't my time of the day to think about these things.
yeah,
You're always thinking about, right, those clients.
right,
So there's a
for sure.
benefit there too, where they're getting
Yeah.
that constant,
So like, I'll go to a conference. I'll go to a conference like AWE or um, some other AR VR conference, SIGGRAPH or something, and I'll be representing all my clients. To your point, I
Mhm.
never work for clients that compete with each other at the same time. And so a lot of times I'll be working with maybe a software client, a hardware client, a client that creates 3D assets, and so that it's synergistic, right? Where
Totally.
and in some cases, some of my clients have even partnered with each other because of my work with them together. And so when I go out and I really focus, it allows me to focus on this space as well. So I read intelligence, I gather market intelligence, and I can share it with all of my clients. And I just need to be careful that I respect the confidential parts of each client, and that's a reputational and a trust thing, as well as a contractual thing. So it's
Mhm.
yeah, I think fractionals, especially for early stage companies that can't afford people in certain roles. Like often they'll be spending all their money on development, and hey, we'll get to business development later. But what that leads to is some big mistakes oftentimes, because you go after the wrong market.
Yeah, no, totally. It makes sense. And you want to be developing a product like hand in hand with what the market's telling you the needs are out there, right? So like if you're head in the sand just building the thing you think everybody's going to want without actually having a finger on the pulse, with someone with expertise like yourself, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, totally.
Excellent. Well, it's great. Well, we're getting to the end of the time, so I appreciate insightful conversation. Fascinating to keep an eye on this technology as these devices get closer to that dream. And I think we'll see it, by the end of the decade for sure. So let's stay in touch and thank you all for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.